Did you draw that leaf on your arm yourself, old man? The voice cut across Harbor Diner and landed like a stone. Ryan Cut Maddox leaned into the booth, his face all grin and edge. Sam Booker watched the spoon turn in his coffee. 80 years had taught him to measure things by rhythm. A spoon, a footstep, a breath. He had a sense for the way men moved, learned to read shape and timing the way others read a newspaper headline. When Cut and his quieter partner walked in, Sam had registered the hallmarks of trained men: quick shoulders, eyes that scanned for weakness, a habit of taking small spaces as if they belonged to them. He'd also registered the civilian clothes: a plain jacket on the loud one, jeans on his partner. No uniform, no patches. On leave, Sam concluded, but carrying the base with them in that swagger. He registered it all like one reads the weather and let the knowledge sit. Cut wanted action. He wanted a scene. "You hear me, old-timer?" he said, louder now. "That doodle looks like something kids put on joke shirts." Senior Chief Marcus Hale stood a step back, a look on his face that tried to keep the peace. "Cut, this isn't the training course. Calm down," he said under his breath. Linda Walker held the coffee pot halfway to the counter. She knew Sam better than a stranger would. He always ordered black, left a generous tip, asked after her father when he heard. She had seen him steady and seen him quiet. She knew his name and his habits, and she worried like family does when strangers poke at something that isn't theirs to touch. On Sam's forearm, the old ink sat soft and dark, an oak leaf inside a circle. 5 small dots forming a ring. The edges had feathered with time. Close enough to read if you knew how to look, vague enough to be a curiosity for anyone else. A regular at the counter lowered his voice so only the nearest could hear. "That leaf, River Ops, years back. Not many men carried it," he said. He said no river name, no unit, just enough for ears to catch and imagine. Cut heard the whisper and laughed. "River Ops, huh? Sounds like a campfire story?" His smile had a brittle line now, as if the whisper found a spot on him that hurt. Sam set the spoon down. Not quick, not for show. A careful motion. His fingers tightened around his mug a fraction, a muscle raising between knuckles. Not anger, assessment. A man counting threat and distance and deciding what to do next. He knew how to watch men test a line. He knew how tests began. Cut's hand reached for Sam's wrist. "Mind if I take a closer look?" he said, half joke, half dare. Linda sucked in a breath. Hale's hand moved, a margin between them, an attempt at restraint that said more about his unease than his authority. Cut's finger brushed the oak leaf. The diner noise thinned as if someone had closed a valve. Conversation lowered. The coffee machine hissed and then seemed very far away. Where the finger touched, the air tightened. Sam turned his head, eyes meeting Cut's hand. The look was calm and clinical, not a challenge, not a flinch, a calculation. He read the angle of the touch, the set of the wrist, the exact distance of the shoulder. He catalogued posture and intent the way a mechanic catalogues wear on a part. The look was old habit, not weakness. "A mark doesn't give a man honor," Sam said. His voice was small and dry enough to make people lean in. "A life does." Cut's grin thinned. He had wanted fireworks. Instead, he felt a flatness, like stepping onto a floor plate that didn't give way. The arrogance in him scrambled for a play it recognized. The calmness in front of him refused to oblige. Cut pressed harder, testing the skin. He wanted to prove something to himself more than to anyone else. Maybe it was training taught him to break softness. Maybe it was a private need to feel bigger. Hale pulled at his sleeve. "Cut! Stop!" Sam didn't pull away. He didn't shout. His knuckles white on the mug, he watched Cut with a soldier's attention, measuring range, timing, the small tells that betray purpose. The readiness in his hand wasn't the panic of a man outmatched. It was the readiness of someone who had carried weight and knew how to keep it steady. Cut's face shifted, small and quick. He had expected spectacle. He found steadiness. He had expected fear or outrage. He found a quiet that unsettled him. "Yeah, thought so," Cut said, but the line rode in a shallow current. It had the sound of a man trying to cover the fact he had misread the room. "If this angers you, hit like and type honor below." The finger still rested on the oak leaf. The small act of touch had finished, but the day had already been redirected. The story was starting to pull tight around that single, quiet moment. Marcus Hale's hand hovered, a small attempt at order. He shifted his weight, wanting the trouble to soften. Cut ignored him. He liked when things got sharp. Cut's fingertip found the oak leaf on Sam's forearm and pressed, casual at first. The skin there was a map, thin, freckled with age spots, the veins like pale cords under paper skin. The ink had softened into the grain over years, but the mark still read clear to anyone who cared to look. When Cut touched it, the diner's sound thinned. Conversations folded, forks stilled. The small noises grew distant. A slow pulse rose in Sam's ears, not the engine of any vehicle, but something older, a rhythm that matched a heartbeat remembered. Steady, low, pulling the present toward another place. Behind the counter, Linda slid her phone from her apron. She owed Sam small favors. He was more than a regular. Turning her shoulder as if wiping a table, she thumbed the contact for Stan, her cousin at Camp Valor, and brought the phone to her ear. Her voice was a tight whisper. "Stan, it's Linda at Harbor. I need you. 2 guys on leave, Maddox and Hale, are causing trouble with Sam." Cut glanced toward her at the name, and she quickly covered the phone, feigning a spilled drink. Stan's voice was impatient, crackling with background noise. "It's a diner, Linda. Call the MPs if there's a fight." "It's not a fight," she insisted, her voice dropping lower. "It's disrespect. They're mocking his tattoo. It just feels wrong, Stan." A pause. The impatience in his voice sharpened. "A tattoo? What tattoo?" "An oak leaf," she said, swallowing. "Inside a circle with 5 dots. It's old, faded." She heard Cut laugh again, a brittle sound that made her grip tighten on a milk jug. "Please, he's a good man. I can't just—" Sudden silence on the line. The background noise from Stan's end vanished. His voice returned, completely changed. Flat, cold, serious. "What's the old man's name?" "Sam Booker?" Another dead pause. Then the command. "Hold them there. Do not let them leave. I'm routing this up the chain. Stay out of sight." The line went dead. Linda lowered the phone, her heart hammering against her ribs. She kept her hands busy, but her eyes never left the booth. Cut's head turned. He noticed the motion and smirked, thinking she was nervous. He did not see the phone or hear Stan's words. He only saw movement. Cut tightened his hold, pressing as if to squeeze a story from the skin. He liked testing limits, a habit taught by drill sergeants who saw softness as a thing to be broken. Sam's breath didn't quicken. It narrowed. The pulse in his ears became a metronome as images flashed. Dark water, a lantern's glow, a hand pressing a rag to a wound. He registered sensations, not names. The sting of cold water, the grit of rock, the wet pull of cloth. At the counter, a murmur started, vague enough to be rumor. "River ops. Not many men carried it." The words were whispers, just enough to make a few heads tilt. Cut pressed harder. He wanted confirmation. He wanted the thrill of unmasking. Hale's hand found Cut's sleeve and gave it a harder tug. "Cut," he said, sharp this time. "Enough." Cut's face flushed. The act of pushing at Sam was a thing he'd done before to see how men cracked. But when Sam's eyes lifted and measured him, the look wasn't a flare. It was a quiet inventory. Sam cataloged the angle of Cut's wrist, the distance of his shoulder, the small tells of impatience. It was a soldier's reading, precise and unromantic. "A mark doesn't give a man honor," Sam said. His voice scraped like gravel, direct and small. "A life does." The words landed and did their work. Cut's posture faltered. He had expected noise, shouting, pleading, a collapse. Instead, a steady, old calm met him, and the calm was not ignorance. It was readiness. Cut's hand stilled on the leaf, the contact a spark that lit something older in Sam. The kitchen's radio hummed faintly, and for a moment Sam's whole focus tightened on a single image. A splintered needle held by strong, unshaking fingers. A lantern making a small pool of light on wet rock. The image did not explain where they had been or why. It only said that something had happened, and the mark was the thing that kept it from being forgotten. Cut exhaled, something brittle in it, and forced a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Hale's fingers closed around Cut's arm, firm enough to be restraint and soft enough not to humiliate. The booth sat quiet as everyone felt the shift. The finger remained on the leaf, a small claim on old skin. The touch had done more than poke at a memory. It had opened a door. The diner waited to see what would step through. Rain hammered the river. The boat slid through black water between limestone teeth. Lantern light shook across wet faces. They moved on clipped breaths, mud gluing to boots. Sam kept his hands on the rifle, less a comfort than proof he was still part of the work. Shots broke the dark, quick and scattered. One man went down, hitting the boat's wood with a thud that changed the night. They wrenched the boat ashore into a hollow in the karst. Inside, the cave smelled of wet leather and iron. Someone set a lantern in a notch of rock, its small light making everything else darker. The injured man was a lieutenant, clutching a wounded thigh. A man with a scar took a field dressing and worked with practiced urgency. They had no sutures, only thread and boiled cloth. The decision to mark was not a whim. It was a response. Someone had already been taken that night. The mark would hold the memory against the forgetting that comes after survival. Sam took the bamboo splinter whittled into a needle. "Hold him steady," he said. The lieutenant hissed, knuckles white on the plank. Sam's fingers were slow, guiding the splinter over the lieutenant's forearm, pressing ink made of coffee and soot into the skin. The oak leaf was crude but recognizable. 5 small dots went around it, each a deliberate point. "This is for Miller," someone said, and the words landed like a rock. Miller was a name that made a throat close in the dark. No one explained who Miller was. The name carried the shape of a man already imagined gone. The tiny phrase bent the work into a truth. They were not marking themselves for glory. They were making a tether to a man they had lost. As Sam worked, he felt the wet grain of stone under his knees, the sting of cold water on his boots, the coarse rasp of cloth against an exposed joint. The needle pricked. The lieutenant's breath came quick and then steadier. The lantern threw hard lines across faces, and for a moment Sam saw each face like a ledger, lines of worry and the small, ridiculous humor that keeps a group alive. When the last dot was placed, one of the younger men spoke the name the operation had been called in hushed hours, a name that was more vow than title. "Evergreen," he said. The word fit the moment. Green for the river, evergreen for something meant to last. No letterhead, no file, only mouths passing the name and skin that would carry it. Sam felt the mark heavy in the way a pocket full of stones feels heavy. It did not make the hurt smaller. It made the promise larger. They wrapped the injured limb tight and steadied him for the walk back to the boats, each man moving with the awkward, careful choreography of people carrying a weight not solely their own. At some point, Sam had time to notice small things. The way blood darkened the edge of the cloth, the way the youngest of them kept his eyes on the lantern as if wanting to memorize where the light had been, the particular rhythm of the rain against the cave mouth. He pressed his thumb to the oak leaf on the lieutenant's arm once, like sealing a note. The deed was less about ink than about the naming of what they'd done. We stayed, we held, we remember. They eased the injured into the boat, shoulders taking the load in a line that belied how exhausted they were. No one spoke of medals. They spoke in short necessities. Water, hold, move. The lantern guttered, and a fly traced a lazy circle through the little cone of light. Back in the diner, Sam's eyes opened to the ceiling above the booth. The cave glow dimmed and left behind the taste of metal in his mouth. He set the mug down with hands that had done that careful, steady work long before this morning. The oak leaf under his sleeve felt like a small, heavy thing. A sound of urgency rose in Linda's throat. She did not speak aloud, but mouthed the words toward Stan's saved number behind the counter. An urgent, silent push that said enough. Do something. Stan was at the far edge of the proving ground, mid-stride. When the phone in his hand lit with Linda's missed call, the line went dead, but Linda's words echoed in Stan's mind. Oak leaf. 5 dots. Sam Booker. Harbor Diner. That handful of words tightened something in him. He had spent years parsing margins and footnotes, and he remembered the scribble in a faded annex months ago. Booker, River Operations. A line underlined by someone who signed with weight. It had been a whisper on paper. Linda's call had just put it into the world. He clipped his phone, thumbed the secure mic, and said 3 words that reoriented the range. Hold current fire. The voice was economy. It carried because Stan's tone implied access to files people respected without asking for them. Guns went to safe. Men stopped mid-rehearsal and looked at him as if he had thrown a switch. He moved down the lane with long, plain steps, phone in his palm, scanning the faces of trainees like a man checking a list he already knew the end of. He did not explain. Explanation is a luxury when an unfiled name begins to breathe. He keyed a single, secure message upward. Oakleaf, 5 dots. Booker, Harbor Diner. Hold them there. Forward to command. The words looked small on the screen, but they carried history. A corporal mouthed a question. What's the play? And Stan only shook his head. It wasn't the time for debate. He had the half-memory of a file and the clarity of a civilian's call. That combination justified action. Let it grow small and private, and it could become a mess that dragged more people in. Act quick and clean, and the incident could be contained. He felt the machine pivot. A logistics voice answered a keyed net. A black SUV idled. Someone brought earpieces to plain-clothed men. The proving ground folded into a readiness the moment the right names were on the wire. Stan walked toward the command van and sent the note to command. He typed the little phrase that floated in his head like a stone. Keep them there. Preserve the scene. Do not let civilians be swept up in rumor. What made him move was not bravado. It was recognition. The oak leaf was a sign he had seen once in a margin that had not been meant for general eyes. Seeing it in a diner, on public skin, in a place meant for ordinary light and ordinary gossip, meant a risk. Names and histories, things meant to be held in quiet, would be pulled into daylight and then twisted by every loud mouth around them. So he moved the simplest way he could. He halted live action. He called for minimal support. He kept instructions tight. The goal was narrow. Stop escalation before it began. At the gate, the first support vehicle rolled, black in the sun, and Stan watched it like a man watching a wave begin. He thought of the diner's spoon on a saucer. He thought of a man's wrist with ink blurred by years. He thought how a small touch in a small place could pull a whole system into motion. He did not imagine himself a hero. He imagined himself a steward. The steward's work is unglamorous. Interrupt the everyday, hold the scene, and let the people with the correct authority decide the rest. He hustled toward the command trailer, radio snagged to his shoulder. In the net, a crisp voice answered, "Copy, forward to command." The line felt like a hinge closing. Stan took one last look down the proving lanes. Men stood with rifles slung. Eyes met his with the understanding that something beyond the drill had happened. He clipped his phone into the rig, squared his shoulders, and moved toward the gate where the convoy gathered. Orders were already queuing for higher command. The proving ground had shifted from rehearsal to readiness before anyone in the diner could know it. Stan had pulled a thin thread and watched the pattern rearrange. He told himself it was the right call. The margin he'd once read had teeth. He would not leave it loose in daylight. From the command platform, General Robert H. Cross watched the proving ground's tidy patterns. Stan's message landed on his secure net. Oakleaf, 5 dots, Harbor Diner. The words were a key. Cross set his binoculars down and stood. "Get vehicles ready," he said to the nearest captain. The order folded into the room like a blade, clean and immediate. A junior officer, surprised, started to speak. "Sir, the exercise—" Cross cut him with a look so cold it shut the man's mouth. He didn't waste words. He did not lecture or theorize. He moved, and movement is its own explanation in a place where actions mean rank. "Prep the detail. We go now," Cross ordered. The tone was small and absolute. There was no ceremony in it. There was intent. Staff shifted. Phones lit. A driver stepped into an SUV and closed the door with a soft, certain thud. People who had been busy breathing in tactical rhythms slowed and let the new tempo take hold. The room tightened around the fact of motion. Cross walked toward the staging area, his stride practical. He keyed a secure patch. "Hold the scene. Minimal footprint. No publicity." The message was about control. Outside, the convoy assembled with quiet efficiency. Cross climbed into the lead vehicle and closed the door, the sound decisive. A captain beside him hesitated, jaw tight. "Sir." Cross placed a hand on the man's arm, a fast, steadying pressure. It was not comfort, it was focus. "Keep this contained," he said. "No spectacle. We go in and we leave clean." The convoy rolled out, tires soft on packed dirt, the vehicles moving with the neat alignment of practice. Cross watched the proving ground pass in a blur of pale dust and straight edges. He did not give interviews. He did not call ahead. He did what was needed to protect the shape of a small thing from being turned into a larger harm. As the lead vehicle took the access road, Cross listened to the low static on the net, reports cascading in short lines, and then felt the machine of response begin to settle into place. He thought in brief measures: preserve dignity, limit exposure, secure facts. Those were instructions you do not debate in a drill bay. You act. The convoy picked up speed. Drivers thumbed radio checks. A support sedan peeled off to meet the lead, and men in plain clothes rose into posture like a rehearsed tableau. Cross's reflection in the dark glass of the vehicle was small and steady. He folded his hands in his lap and watched the day narrow ahead of them. At the edge of the proving ground gate, the road turned and the morning opened to scrub and low buildings. The vehicles made themselves into a single, quiet body. A rear door clicked, metal, close, and a boot hit the gravel with a sound that looked larger than it should have. That single boot impact was a punctuation, a step toward a small place where a private mark had been made public. It was not a flourish, it was a choice. The convoy kept moving. The proving ground disappeared behind them. In the lead vehicle, Cross watched the road, tension settling into readiness. The work was concrete. Arrive, assess, protect. The SUV rounded the last bend. Gravel ground under rubber. The convoy slowed as they neared the access lane that would take them into town. A radio pinged. Cross leaned forward. The sound of a door snapping shut behind him cut the thin air. He waited for what the next moment would demand. The lot at Harbor Diner filled with the low, neat thrum of engines. 3 black SUVs eased into place in a tight, practiced line. Doors closed with soft thuds. Men in uniform stepped out, rank on collars, the look of people who move with orders. They formed a perimeter without fanfare. 2 of them took positions by the windows, eyes scanning. One moved inside, pausing by the counter, and spoke a single quiet phrase. "No phones." He said it low, steady. Phones lowered. The air shifted. Cut sat straighter as the shade of the vehicles darkened the window. His grin tried to hold, but his hand on the table trembled. Marcus Hale's jaw tightened. He stepped nearer, a shadow of correction and warning. The door opened, and General Robert H. Cross entered in uniform, tie tight, medals low and precise. He walked straight to the booth where Sam sat, and the walk changed something in the room. People looked up with the instinctive honesty of a body that knows a figure of consequence. Cross did not glance at the men who had caused the trouble. He went directly to Sam, eyes on the old man as if reading a map of years. The movement was deliberate. It made Cut's posture sag. For a moment he seemed to find himself without an audience. Cut pushed himself to his feet, voice rough. "General!" Hale's hand was on his sleeve before the word left Cut's mouth. Hale's fingers closed, firm, pulling him down with a motion that held equal parts caution and shame. The gesture said it all. Not now. Not here. Hale's face tightened. He had understood the scale before Cut had. Cross stopped at the table and looked straight at Sam. There was recognition in the angle of his head. Not spectacle, but something quieter. An old account settled by sight. Sam lifted his chin in a modest answer. The general's salute came slow and exact. It was brief, a practiced tilt of the hand that carried history. It landed between them like an unspoken verdict. Silence deepened. A customer's breath hitched. The diner felt the tilt. The loud man at the booth had been bypassed by someone who knew a different ledger of weight. Cross's eyes held Sam's for a moment, that stretched like a thin wire. He simply removed his glove and rolled his sleeve. The oak leaf on his forearm, inked and sharp, matched the faded leaf on Sam's wrist. A small intake of air moved through the room. Cut's breath hitched. His face paled. He had expected a different outcome. Loud words, a contest. Instead, he met a look that spoke of debts and the cost of forgetting. Linda pressed her hands to the counter until her knuckles whitened. She had only wanted to stop a man from being mocked. Now the room held the weight of more than a bad joke. Cross's salute finished. He dropped his hand and sat with a small, reverent motion. The silence remained, full of the decision that had just been made. Cut's mouth opened and closed. He tried to meet Cross's eyes and failed. Other patrons stared, some with pity, others with a new, awkward respect. A uniformed security man eased toward Cut, his presence a silent block against any impulse to erupt. He spoke to Cut in a low tone, words too quiet for the rest to catch. Cut's shoulders sank. Hale's hand did not leave his sleeve. The gesture had shifted from warning to ownership. Sam set his cup down again. The oak leaf at his wrist gleamed faintly under the diner light. He did not demand attention. He only received it. Cross turned his head only once, a small movement that said this was not theater. He stood, straightened his jacket, and nodded to the man at his side. The team around him formed a discreet circle, protective and professional. The old room took a new breath. The balance had shifted. The question now was simple and heavy. Who would fill the space that had been left where the Mockery used to sit? For a heartbeat, the diner was nothing but potential. Then Cross stepped forward, and his footfall began what would be a careful, small unfolding. A careful, public act that would decide the tone of what came next. Cross lifted his hand. The salute was small, exact. No ceremony, only a practiced motion that closed space without noise. Sam's fingers rose an inch to meet it. The return was brief and true, like two men speaking a language made of habit. Cross rolled his sleeve. The oak leaf on his forearm showed clean lines. It matched Sam's faded mark. For a moment, ink alone did the talking. Cross looked at Sam and then at the booth and said, low and measured, "Miller drowned. We could not pull him out. We promised we would carry what we could not save." The sentence hit the table and stayed there. It was a single, personal fact that made the rest of the morning rearrange itself. He did not recount the night. He did not narrate action. He translated it into consequence. What they had done, and why the mark existed. The words were spare and final. There was no room left for mockery. Cut's grin faded to nothing. He tried to find air for a comeback and found none. The stunt he had hoped for evaporated into a reality he had not owned. His shoulders sank. Color left his face. Marcus Hale's posture folded inward. He had been the quieter partner in the ridicule, the man who thought this was a dare. Now the mark on Sam's arm read like a bill presented at the table. Hale's fingers clenched on the napkin, and the firm pressure said more than an apology ever could. Cross leaned forward a fraction, not to dominate but to make clear where responsibility sat. He spoke again, each line compact and unambiguous. This mark is a promise. It holds names. When you touch it like a joke, you touch the men who paid for it. That is not yours to mock. Sam's hand closed on his cup and stayed there. He nodded once. No triumph, only acknowledgement. The gesture was a weight in the room, Cut swallowed. He tried to stand, to reclaim footing with noise. Hale caught his sleeve and tugged him back. The motion was quick and resolute. The tug read as a private correction. Not here. Not like this. Cut's attempt at loudness deflated under the quiet that had replaced it. Cross did not scold with volume. He stated the fact and let the fact do the work. He was economical with language because economy left less to argue with. We carried names, he said. We carried memory. That is the point of the mark. Around the booth, the diner held its breath. Phones stayed down. The man at the counter folded his hands. Linda's fingers tightened on a towel until the knuckles gleamed. She looked from Cross to Sam and then to Cut and Hale, cataloging what had changed. Cut's face moved through stages. First confusion, then the slow recognition of offense, then the thin beginnings of shame. He leaned forward, not to interrupt but to listen, and the motion was the first sign he might do something besides posture. Hale's jaw worked as if the muscle was finding a new job. He met Sam's eyes for a beat. No words, just a look that held apology tight enough to be useful. The look changed him more than any rebuke could have. Cross kept speaking in short measures, each phrase a small command to thought rather than a lecture. Marks were not for vanity, he said. They were for keeping a name present when files and ceremonies could not. Respect is the minimal contract you owe the dead. The line left the booth with the bluntness of a rule rather than rhetoric. Sam's reply was minimal. We remembered him. The words were small but absolute. They sealed the idea Cross had offered. Cross tapped the table once, a quiet mark of transition. He signaled, "Sit," and his motion gathered the booth into a compact audience. "Listen," he said. "This is not about shame theater. It's about responsibility. We will handle this discreetly and correctly." The men sat. Cut folded his hands on the table, fingers interlaced, a nervy pattern that said he was holding himself in check. Hale sat straighter, as if posture might atone in part. The two men had been called into a moral currency they had not been counting on. Cross gave a short fragment of context. No scene setting, only frame. Some things cannot be listed on paper, he said. They are kept on skin so they won't be forgotten. That is why this matters. The sentence was a hinge. It linked the mark to action without retelling any night. He watched them take it in. He saw Cut's face, the decisions flickering like a faulty light, and he saw Hale's slow, small bends toward comprehension. He let silence do the rest, because silence is where repair begins when the facts have done their work. Cross finished not with a pronouncement, but with a direction. "We will address this with discretion and with the gravity it requires," he said. "No spectacle, no public shaming. We restore dignity." The words were a charter. He placed them gently and firmly on the table. Sam's fingers rested over the oak leaf at his wrist. He did not ask for anything more than what he had been given, to be seen and not mocked. Cut exhaled a long breath that seemed to take some of the earlier bravado with it. Hale's hand reached briefly to touch Cut's forearm, an action that read as both admonition and a fragile offer of solidarity. Cross rose the tiniest degree and inclined his head, a curt, private acknowledgement rather than a sermon. He had done what he needed to do, turned public cruelty into a private demand for responsibility. The booth remained quiet, transformed. The mark that had been a punchline now had a witness and a process. The next step would be procedural, discreet, and measured, but the moral movement had already occurred. They sat, the men in the booth, and the diner contracted around that new fact. The oak leaves on 2 forearms lay visible and still, and in their silence the room learned what it had to carry. Cross set his palms on the table and spoke with the bluntness of someone closing an account. "Project Evergreen, 1970. 2 words that made the booth inhale. He gave a hard frame. A low run across a karst river. 5 men, few lights. The facts landed, making the room stop pretending it wasn't part of it. He let the images come in small beats, sharp and bare. We moved low. Lanterns were small to keep from drawing eyes. One of our men went under. He did not ornament the line. He made it personal in the least dramatic way possible. We swore we'd carry what we couldn't pull back. That's why the mark exists." The oak leaf on his arm and the faded one on Sam's wrist answered the sentence without more words. 2 marks. 2 men who returned, both weighed by what they had kept. The sight removed any argument about vanity. The symbol read like evidence. Cross leaned forward, his voice low and direct. "The uniform you wear was built on the backs of men like him. The reputation you enjoy was paid for on nights that gave him that mark." He paused, letting the words sink in. "When you mock that history, you spit on the graves of the men who made your job possible. It's not theft of a mark. It's a betrayal of the lineage that gives you your pride." The words reframed their mockery into a profound moral wrong. He spoke of the 5 in tight fragments. A youngest who swore he'd hold names. A medic who would not let go of a splint. We marked each other so the absent could be present. The fragments sketched duty, not drama. Sam's hand tightened on the wood. He didn't need to speak. The way his thumb brushed the faded leaf said enough. The booth listened the way a room listens when the air goes thin. People folded inward to give space to weightier things. Cut's face lost whatever bravado it had left. Hale's jaw worked. Neither man had words that could unmake what Cross had placed on the table, a fact and a demand. The reaction was swift and quiet now, not the noisy defense they had first intended. Cross shifted, practical and unromantic. "We'll make sure memory isn't worn as costume. He did not call it a program in glossy terms. He said what it would be. Bring actual veterans to speak. Keep it honest. Let them tell names and what they cost. No pomp, no press photos. Cross barked an order into his secure channel. Start a channel. Open line for veteran accounts. I want names, dates, and truth. We'll listen and act. The order was an internal line of accountability, not a public solicitation. Cross left the line hanging in the air. It had the weight of a policy whispered into existence, a clear mechanism for turning private memory into institutional attention without spectacle. He did not dwell on Miller's name or repeat the night's sensory details. He did not have to. The point he hammered at was immediate. The mark is a covenant. It binds the living to their dead, and it demands fidelity. When you laugh at the mark, you laugh at a promise kept in the dark, he said. That pain is not yours to trade. Sam's reply was small. We remembered him. It was an echo, a confirmation. The room absorbed it as if receiving a ledger entry, short, definite, irreducible. Cross added a procedural note. We will handle this discreetly. We will confront Mockery with accountability, not spectacle. Those who wore the mark without the claim will be given an opportunity to step into the work or to remove the mark. The line was crisp. Accountability and a path to repair, not public shaming. Linda's fingers tightened on the rag. A patron at the counter looked away, the pleasure gone from his coffee. Cut tried to speak then, to find words that might smooth the fracture, but the syllables stumbled. Hale looked at him as if seeing him anew, no proud comrade now, but an accomplice to an offense. The tension between them shifted into something that might be rectified if they accepted responsibility. Cross folded his hands as if closing a file for now. This is not theater, he said. This is stewardship. The single word tightened the room. Stewardship meant ongoing work, not a headline. He looked at Sam, then at the others, and added quietly, we will bring truth where it's needed. We will ask the young to hear names. It was an operational decision, not PR. Finally, Cross nodded to the group, signaling the moment was over and the work was beginning. He had given them a frame, a task, and a direction. The public moment had narrowed into a private motion, action moving up a chain, not spectacle. The diner exhaled in small, uneven breaths. The oak leaf on 2 forearms sat visible and still. The room had been taught something precise. Memory costs something, and the institution would now be called on to carry that cost, quietly and thoroughly. General Cross slid a folder across the table. Paper on wood. No cameras. No speeches. These aren't courts martial, he said. You won't be dishonorably discharged. You'll work. Heritage initiative. You'll host. You'll run logistics. You'll record names accurately. You'll listen. Cut's fingers hovered over the folder as if testing its weight. Hale's jaw tightened. His hand rested on the chair back. They did not protest. Their first tasks were small. Cut cataloged boxes, uniforms, photos, writing names on index cards and deliberate block letters. Hale drove a veteran to a session, carrying the man's bag without a joke. In a tight room of folding chairs, a veteran spoke a name, a date, a lost route. Cut listened, then copied the facts onto a card. No mockery, just work. After the session, Cut stayed behind. In the empty room, he sat with the index card, reading the name he'd just written, aloud, then silent. The stillness was an admission. Hale's change was more visible, fetching a thermos, offering a steadying hand to a trembling veteran. Small, concrete acts in a quiet rhythm. Work filled odd hours, answering emails, setting up rooms, printing name sheets. Details became the measure of respect. Dates, unit numbers, burial places. Attention to fact made rumor impossible. Sam watched, a witness more than a leader. He corrected gently. Once, when Cut hesitated over a pronunciation, Sam leaned in. Say it like he's sitting right here. An instruction, not a lecture. The initiative took them into schools and community halls. Recruits sat with veterans. Cut checked names against lists, matching dates, asking concrete questions. Where buried? Which company? His pen filled lines that would be filed, not hashtagged. Private moments changed them. One evening, Hale drove Sam to a veteran's porch. The man named a friend and wept quietly. Hale listened on the steps. On the drive home, the radio played low. Listening had replaced performance. Accountability had a paper trail. At a quarterly review, Cut read the roster he'd helped compile. He stumbled on a name, corrected himself, and waited. The officers nodded. The work had credibility through accuracy, not apology. Time passed in small, visible acts. Cut's hand steadying a projector, Hale checking that a van's straps were secure, a volunteer folding chairs at dawn. The camera would catch an index card being placed in a box, a name noted and filed. These were tiny returns, but durable. There were moments that cut through the routine. At one session, a widower read his brother's name and began to cry. Cut handed him a napkin without looking away. At another, a young recruit asked how to remember someone. Hale answered with specifics. Dates, place of burial, the unit's history. Concrete anchors the recruit could carry. Each answer was practical, earned. Cross required honesty. Cut and Hale submitted written reflections and led parts of sessions where veterans could correct the record. They did not perform remorse. They documented work and let veterans hold them to standards. The practice reshaped behavior. Public penance replaced by private labor. Months collected into a year. The initiative found partners, local groups, small funds for travel, a schedule of speakers. Cut updated rosters. Hale coordinated pickups. The two men were still accountable, but the ledger now showed effort, not only fault. One bright morning at Riverside Market, Cut moved through crates with a tote stamped with the initiative logo. He spotted Sam choosing tomatoes. Cut approached, hands slightly shaking, not theatrically, but with something honest inside. Sir, Cut said, voice low, not begging. I'm sorry. I'll help carry the names. I'll do the work. The line was a promise tied to a shared weight. Sam looked at him for a long breath, then nodded once. He reached out and pressed Cut's forearm briefly. Not a blessing, not an absolution. Just contact that said the promise would be witnessed. Hale stood a step back, watching, and let the moment be small. No public applause. No staged reconciliation. Just a man in a market given back some measure of responsibility, and another man allowing it. The folder Cross had placed on the table a year ago stayed closed, but the work continued open. The Heritage Initiative moved quietly. Lists kept, names spoken, veterans heard. Repair proved stubborn and unglamorous. It demanded attention to detail, the kind of labor that doesn't make headlines, but does not allow memory to be stolen. They had not been forgiven by proclamation. They were apprenticed to service. The consequence was clear. Accountability that built repair, one careful act at a time. A year later, sunlight pooled between the stalls at Riverside Market. Sam moved slowly, lifting a tomato, turning it in his palm. He saw them before they saw him, Cut and Hale, moving with a quiet purpose, a tote with the initiative logo slung over Cut's shoulder. They spotted him and approached, stopping a respectful distance away. The swagger was gone, replaced by a steady competence. "Sir," Cut began, his voice low but clear. He didn't offer a handshake first. He offered proof. "Miller's file is complete. We found his sister in Ohio. She sent a photograph." He held up a small laminated card with a young man's smiling face on it. It was not an apology. It was a report, an offering of work done. Hale stepped forward, his own voice quiet. "I let it happen, sir. I own that. We've been trying to fix it." Sam looked from the photograph to the faces of the two young men. He saw the change there. Not just the absence of arrogance, but the presence of a weight carried willingly. He reached out and took the card, his thumb gently brushing over the image. "Good work, sons," he said. Then he extended his hand. Cut took it. The handshake was firm, an exchange between men remade by time. "You carried through," Sam said, his voice a quiet rumble. "That was the point. Not the apology, but the keeping." He looked at both of them, his gaze direct. "There's a difference between wearing something and becoming it. Between borrowing a symbol and carrying the memory. Don't confuse them." Cut nodded, his throat tight. "We won't, sir." Sam gave them a final piece of instruction, a command softened by hope. "Carry the life," he said, "not the mark. Let the work make you true." "Thank you," Cut said simply. "We'll keep it." Sam took his hand back. "Do the work," he answered. Fewer words, full weight. "Keep the stories safe." They exchanged a final respectful nod and moved back into the flow of the market. They had lists to update, calls to make, a quiet, necessary duty. Sam watched them go. He picked up a tomato, feeling its weight in his palm. He thought of the first day in the diner and of the slow, stubborn work of repair. He smiled, a small, almost secret expression, then turned to the vendor. "How are the tomatoes today?" The quiet heroes walk among us, often in the most ordinary of places, doing the most necessary of work. Honor isn't a spectacle. It's the steady, quiet work of keeping memory alive. There are stories like this all around us. We just have to be willing to listen. If this story mattered to you, help us keep other stories alive. Every share is a telling, and every subscription helps us find the next story that needs to be heard.